Okay, I think we are ready now. And I hope we have everybody on board. So welcome everybody to this webinar on data simulation in biogeochemical modeling. The webinar will focus on data simulation from a user perspective, so we will not be diving into the theory behind data simulation. But first of all, I think we should present ourselves. My name is Maj-Britt Kronborg. By training, I'm a physical oceanographer, and since then I've been working at DHI mostly as a hydrodynamic modeler, but throughout the years I also got myself into biogeochemical modeling. And then maybe you will present yourself, Rikke?
Yes, I would like to. I'm Rikke Margrethe Kloster. I have a master's degree in biology, and then I continued with physical limnology as a PhD. I work as a senior ecological modeler at DHI. I've been employed since 2007, and my main expertise is biogeochemical modeling.
Thank you, Rikke. And this is the agenda for today. So first we will touch upon why do we use data simulation and what kind of observation can we assimilate into our models. And then we will shortly talk a little bit about what is data assimilation and how we work with it in modeling. And then we get to the main focus of this webinar, where Rikke will present 2 use cases from the inner Danish seas, where we are assimilating different environmental observations into our biogeochemical models. And then after the presentation, we will take some questions. You will have to write that in the chat, and then we will take it from there. Okay, so why do we use data assimilation? Before I answer that question, then I would like to introduce the models that we are using. At DHI, we are working with biogeochemical modeling in marine waters all over the world. And when we say biogeochemical modeling or ecological modeling, we mean models that can describe the eutrophication processes such as phytoplankton blooms, oxygen depletion, and nutrient enrichment. The models consist of a hydrodynamic model, usually set up in Mach3 FM, 3-dimensional model based on a flexible mesh. And then on top, we have our biogeochemical module, usually set up in MikeEcolab. And then when we use data assimilation, that takes place in a third module, which can either interact with the 3D hydrodynamic model or the Ecolab model. It can actually also interact with both of them. Here in this webinar, we will focus on data simulation in the Ecolab module. And then I should also remember to say that the data simulation module is not yet a part of the official releases, Mike releases. It might be in the future, but for now it's only available for DHI engineers. So why do we use data assimilation? We use data assimilation to be able to combine the numerical models and the measurements. When we think about the models, model results that from these models have a full spatial and temporal description, meaning that we can get information about the environmental status everywhere in our model domain and at all times. Models also had the advantage that it not only describes the environmental status, it also describes the processes that lead to the status. But when we think about the downside of the model, then the downside is the lower point-wise accuracy, because the model only describes the processes that we have built into the models via the algorithms. And some of these algorithms are approximated. Some of them, sometimes we only let the model describe the the dominant processes, and sometimes we have some spatial resolution that limit what we can describe in the models. So model results will, compared to measurements, be lower in the point-wise accuracy. The measurements, on the other hand, have a high point-wise accuracy, at least in the point where it's measured and at the time where it's measured. If you just go a little bit further away, they don't tell you much about what is going on, and also likewise in time, if just before or after a measurement, it may not be related to the measurement itself. So measurements compared to the models have a limited spatial and temporal extent. So when we do data assimilation, we would like to combine the best from these two worlds, the high accuracy of the measurements and the high temporal and spatial resolution of the model. And this can be illustrated by this simple example here, where we have a continuous model results, the yellow line, and some point measurements. And we see that the model result here in general resembles measurements quite good, maybe except the period in the middle of the time span. We also see that in between the first two and the last two measurements, the model contributes with some additional information about the concentration relative to what we can get from the measurements, where we would probably have just interpolated a straight line if we did not know about the model results. In the middle of the time span, we see that the model is quite off, and this is where the data assimilation comes into play. So if we do imagine that we assimilate our model results here by adjusting the models towards the measurements, we might get something that looks like this. Maybe we don't get all the way to the observations, but with these results, we both keep the high temporal resolution in the result, and we gain some of the accuracy of the measurements. And this is exactly what data assimilation is about. So what kind of observation can be assimilated into biogeochemical models? In the Mike models, we can work with 4 different kinds of observations. We can assimilate point measurements and profile measurements. We can also assimilate track data. That could be a long track satellite data, as illustrated in the example to the right. We can also assimilate horizontal 2D data, which could, for example, be satellite data from the ocean surface. And then what is a good set of observations for assimilation? A good set of observation for assimilation is frequent or continuous data. I think we can all imagine, say that we have measurements with a long time interval in between, then we can get our model adjusted to the measurement, but then in the time until the next measurement, the model will tend to fall back into its own state in between. And that's not a good result. Likewise, in space, it's also preferable to have a good spatial coverage. Otherwise, we can end up in the same situation where we're only adjusting the model point-wise. One can also say that a good set of observation for assimilation is data with high representativeness. Think about an open water measurement here that represents, where the measurements represents a large water volume. Here we can do some tricks in the data assimilation to ensure that we use these data much broader than just in the single point. Rikke will get back to that later. And then finally, you could say that a good set of observations for assimilation is observation wherever the model needs some help, like we saw in our small example from before. So now we turn to very shortly to what is data assimilation and how we work with it in Mike modeling. So the method that we are using most often in Mike, and which we're using in what we're going to present today, is the so-called ensemble Kalman filter data assimilation method. And this method is based on some fundamentals, which I'm now just going to drop on you. And I do that to give you some insight into what the method is based upon and what it takes from the modeler when we are setting up the data assimilation routines. And then I just hope you will accept these fundamentals for now. And if you are interested, you can dive into the theory behind it at a later stage. So the 2 main fundamentals about this method is the so-called measurement uncertainty and the model uncertainty. And the fact that measurements are uncertain, I think we can all relate to that. But what is model uncertainty all about? So model uncertainty can come around for many reasons. One thing could be that we have some missing ecological processes that are simply not described in our model. It could also be that some of these processes that are described depend on parameters that are not set correctly, or maybe not described in too high detail. In our model, we're also using boundary data at open boundaries, and we're also using meteorological forcing at surface. Both of these data sets are very often model data, which are in turn also uncertain. Then we also have some freshwater sources that we impose on our system. Maybe the water volume are not correctly described, or maybe the concentrations are too coarse described. And many more things could be uncertainties in our model. So when we have sort of carefully thought about what are the uncertainties in the measurements and in the model, and specified that in our data simulation setup, we will have always to remember that it is actually the relation between the model and the measurement uncertainty that defines the strength of the assimilation. So if we have a model with a high uncertainty and an observation with a low uncertainty, the method will drag the model results strongly towards the safe or the certain measurement, whereas if it's the other way around, we will only get a weak data assimilation of our model. So the fourth fundamental about this method, I'm just going to throw that on you now, and that is the fact that even though if we only have just 1 point measurement we are assimilating into our model domain, we are not just adjusting the model in the cell where the measurement is actually representing. We are adjusting the whole model domain, so at all levels and everywhere horizontally as well. And on top of that, we are also not only adjusting the one parameter that we are assimilating into the model. So say we are assimilating a chlorophyll value into the model, we will not only be adjusting chlorophyll in the model, we will also be adjusting all other biogeochemical parameters, which could, for example, be the nutrients or the oxygen values. And this fact is actually one of the things that makes this method quite robust, as it sort of tends to keep a balance in things in this way. Finally, we will just return to the measurement uncertainty briefly again, because before I just told you that whenever we are simulating just one data value, we will be adjusting the model all over in the model domain. And this is also true, but sometimes we see that these adjustments looks more like noise instead of real natural adjustments. And to prevent that in our data simulation, we can introduce something called the localization, which is a radius that we can set sort of to limit where the measurement leads to adjustments in our model. So in the example here to the right, we have 4 measurements, 2 at the surface at the right stars, and 2 more at the bottom just below the stars. And here we are introducing a localization radius horizontally 10 kilometers and vertically 10 meters for each of these 4 measurements, meaning that we are limiting the adjustment based on these measurements to within these radiuses. So that we get a maximum adjustment right at the measurement point, and then it declines to 0 at the distance of the radiuses that we have given. So this was sort of the last fundamental that I just wanted to introduce to you here today. So now it's time for me to recap what I've been talking about. So data simulation is a technique that combines modeling and observations by adjusting our model towards the measurements, and thereby bringing the best from the two worlds together. So the high accuracy of the measurement and the high temporal and spatial resolution of our model. When we are setting up data simulation in a biogeochemical model, it takes quite some knowledge on the biogeochemical processes in the system. both the real world system and the system that we have described in our model. It takes some knowledge on the measurements we are using and their uncertainties, and it also takes quite some knowledge on the model itself. And when we have used the best of our knowledge to set up the data assimilation routine, then we start calibrating. Like in any other model work, we will have to calibrate our model. So we start turning our parameters up and down and combining the model uncertainties in different ways and maybe describing it in different ways and so on and so on. So bottom line, setting up data assimilation takes quite some knowledge on our system, and it takes quite some time. And with this, I hope I have given you a little insight in what it takes to work with data assimilation. And with this, I will hand it over to Rikke to show you some real work.
Thank you, Maj-Britt. We will look at two use cases from the inner Danish seas. And what is the inner Danish seas? Denmark. This here is Denmark. In the center, the nice, beautiful head, and that's surrounded by oceans. So on the west of Denmark, we have the North Sea, and the east of Denmark, we have the Baltic Sea. And if we zoom in on Denmark, we see that we have here the inner Danish seas, and within the inner Danish seas, we have developed two models, biogeochemical models. The blue area is we call the Northern Belt Sea, and in that model, we have applied the data assimilation with data on satellite-based chlorophyll A and on biweekly monitoring data of inorganic nutrients at surface and bottom. And then the green model domain is called Southern Belt Sea. And here we have applied data assimilation with data on continuous buoy measurements of dissolved oxygen at the bottom. For both model domains, we have used model uncertainties on 21 calibration constants in the biogeochemical model, and that we apply these uncertainties to introduce a spread around the mean state, so each ensemble member in the model has a variation. The uncertainties are focused to be in the biochemical model on calibration parameters that we, by experience, know they change quite a lot in the model results. So here we have used phytoplankton growth rates, sedimentation rates of phytoplankton and dead organic matter, zooplankton grassing and mortality rates, mineralization of organic matter in water column and sediment, denitrification and nitrification rates, sediment iron binding capacity of phosphate. We say that these uncertainties we apply to the calibration constants, they are strong model errors or model uncertainties, because we see they have an effect in the whole model domain and not just at a smaller local effect. For example, if we would apply model uncertainties only at the boundary conditions. We start with looking at the Northern Belt Sea. It's located in between Jylland and Fyn, and it has some fjords and Aarhus Bay, so Horsens Fjord and Vejle Fjord. We have data assimilated monitoring data, and the monitoring data in the area consists of bi-weekly sampling at water surface and bottom, here exemplified with the measurements of phosphate in the surface with the black and in the bottom with the red triangles. And we see that in these waters, in the open water station here, we see that phosphate is depleted during the summer. In the model domain, there are 12 monitoring stations. Some are open waters and some are located within the fjords. For the open water stations, we found that we could use a large horizontal localization, which Maj-Britt talked about before. That is, how large an area should the data assimilation have an effect. And here we use for the open water, we use 15 kilometers in the horizontal and 10 meter in the vertical. And then for when we get closer to the coast and within the fjords, this localization areas are decreased down to 4 kilometers in very small end of the fjords and 3 meters in the vertical. The satellite data has another type of coverage than the monitoring data, which is sampled bi-weekly. The satellite data is cover the full model domain, and also we have a higher resolution in time. Of course, this depends on the amount of clouds during the year. If you look at the frequency of the data coverage, when we look at satellite data, we can see here that with the red triangles that the monitoring data of chlorophyll A here, and then we have the satellite data with the blue triangles, and we can see that the frequency of the satellite data are higher than the sampling at this station. What we also see is that there's quite a good correspondence between the measurements and the satellite data. And further, we also see that the satellite describes a higher concentration in the spring phytoplankton spring bloom than what is described with the monitoring data. Then we jump right into the results of the data assimilation from this open water, exemplified with this open water station, one of the open water stations in the areas. And we can see here now the monitoring data are black squares and the satellite data are pink triangles. And then we have two lines of model results. The light green is what we call the baseline. That is the model results without any data assimilation. And the dark green is the model results with data assimilation. And we can see that the model results are adjusted towards the satellite data. We do not force the model results to meet the satellite data 1-to-1, because then that is what we could call a very strong data assimilation. Then we force the model results towards a place where we need to twist all the parameters in the model, and then we very likely risk an unstable model, and we are focusing on keeping the model results stable. So we can see that it is adjusted toward the spring bloom, but it's not going up to the same values as what has been measured with the satellite. We also see that it is adjusted downwards when the satellite measurements are smaller than or lower concentration than the model results. What we also see is in periods with where the coverage of the satellite data is where there is no coverage of the satellite data, the model results go towards the baseline results again. If you look at the results overall, then we look at the root mean square error, and what we would like to see is that it is getting reduced. And here we have some different model runs. We have the baseline with the blue, that was the results without data assimilation. And then we have been running the model with 3 different variations of data assimilation. We have been running one where we only assimilated the satellite data to see the pure effect of the satellites. Then that's the orange, and the green is then running with only monitoring data, and then the red one is the combined results with both the monitoring data and the satellite data. And we see that if we go from the blue to the red, a reduction of the root mean square error at the majority of the stations. And especially at 2 stations, we see quite a large reduction of the root mean square error. And if we look at which stations they are both located within the fjords. One station, that is this one, that's located in Horsens Fjord, and here we see that it doesn't really benefit from assimilating the satellite data, but we see a large reduction in the root mean square error when we assimilate with the measurements. And the reason for it not to benefit from the satellite data is most likely that this area here is poorly covered by the satellite because it's too close to the coast, and this is a shallow area where the satellite data is not covered. The other fjord is then the opposite. That one has a clear positive effect from assimilating the satellite data, but not a real effect from assimilating the inorganic nutrients. And this fjord here under this station is actually not exactly covered by the satellite data, but it is very close to satellite data, and it benefits from assimilating the data into the model. we also look at other model parameters when we evaluate the effect of the data assimilation. We have also been assimilating inorganic nutrients. So here we look at the reduction of the root mean square error of nitrate and nitrate in the surface as an example. And we see that we overall get a small decrease in the root mean square error going from baseline towards the combined data assimilation, not for all stations, but overall. And again, the larger effect we see in the 3 stations. This is the 2 stations. These are the 2 stations which we looked at before, the Horsens and the Vejlefjord, and this is the outer Horsens Fjord. They have a large reduction in root mean square error of the inorganic nutrients. Another parameter we look at is the dissolved oxygen. This one parameter we did not assimilate. We have only been assimilating chlorophyll and inorganic nutrients, but all model parameters are updated when we use data assimilation. And we see here that the dissolved oxygen in the bottom also is having a changed root mean square error and is actually getting decreased at quite a lot of the station, meaning that we have an improved description also of the dissolved oxygen at the bottom when we assimilate satellite data and inorganic nutrients, especially the inorganic nutrients, have a positive effect on the model description of dissolved oxygen. So to sum up on the results we have been looking at the Northern Belt Sea, we see improvements are generally achieved, though not large, in the modeled concentrations of chlorophyll, inorganic nutrients, and dissolved oxygen when assimilating satellite-based chlorophyll measurements and NOVANA nutrient measurements. Simultaneous assimilation of NOVANA nutrient measurements stabilizes the results and gives overall the best results. And the biggest differences between the model results and the measurements are typically found in the fjords, and here the biggest effect of the assimilation are also achieved. So we now move south towards the Southern Belt Sea. This is an area which is experiencing oxygen depletion. This is measured with monitoring data, and then to describe the severeness of the oxygen depletion, traditionally area distribution maps are developed from the measurements, but the Danish Environmental Protection Agency are looking into methods where they can expand the knowledge on the oxygen depletion. The measurements typically start in July and last until November. Sometimes oxygen depletion is already there when the measurements start, so they would like to know when does the measurements or the oxygen depletion actually start. And one way to improve the knowledge is to employ buoys that can continuously measure the oxygen at the bottom. Here we have, so they have employed some buoys that is called Havsands data loggers with a bottom rig which has a connection to the marker buoy in the surface, and this marker buoy collects the data and sends it to a database. Then one thing is when you start to data assimilate is to evaluate which data will the model benefit from data assimilating. And in this case, 4 Havsands data has been 4 Havsands stations has been 4 Havsands stations has been measuring data, but only 2 of them we decided was useful for the model because they were located at a place which is having a good resolution in the model, whereas the 2 other stations are located in areas where the model resolution are not high enough for having any benefits of data assimilation. This is the results of the data assimilation of dissolved oxygen from the 2 stations. If we look at here at the figures, we have here surface model and measurements, which we are not interested in, and then we zoom in on the
model results and the measurement results at the bottom, where we have the red triangles in the for measurements, and we have Hausans data with the orange line, and then we have the model results without data assimilation. That is the baseline. That's the dark green line here, and we have the dark blue line that follows the orange line quite well, which is the model results with data assimilation. And we see that the model results with the data assimilation of the Hausans oxygen is adjusted quite close to the measurements. And then in periods where there are no measurements from the data logger, we see also, like with the chlorophyll, that the model moves towards the baseline until new measurements arrive. One other thing is we see here at the end that the model is 1 week off from the is 1 week off from the termination of the oxygen depletion, and this is not improved, this 1 week off, with the data assimilation. It is actually possible to force the model to have a stronger data assimilation, so we could have this that it follows this the measured dissolved oxygen in the bottom, but we will then force the model to to a state where it doesn't really like to be, and then we will see instability in the model, and that's the reason for us not to choose to have an extremely strong data assimilation. So this is the overall results from the model, from both the two data assimilation stations and also a lot of validation stations. If we look at the data assimilation stations, we see actually it's not an improvement in one of the stations that's located here, and the reason for that is that one of the measurements from the monitoring data is in disagreement with the Hausans data, and that's the reason for that the root mean square error when we compare to monitoring data is not an improvement, but when we compare to Hausans data, it is an improvement. And then for the validation stations, overall, we see that the model result is adjusted and is improving the root mean square error for the majority of the stations. This is then an area distribution map of the oxygen depletion in the baseline and the data assimilation as an average over September months. And if we look closely, we can see that this area here is having an extended area of oxygen depletion, a bit difficult to see. So if we look at a difference map instead, we can better see which areas has been updated with the data assimilation. And we can see there's quite a large area has an update of the dissolved oxygen depletion from 0.5 to 1 milligram per liter. And then closer to the two data assimilation stations, the two black dots here, we see updates up to 2 milligrams per liter. We also see this area here is not updated at all, and that's simply because oxygen depletion is already there. It cannot get any lower. And that was the results we have from assimilating on dissolved oxygen. And to sum up, we can conclude there's generally a good effect on assimilating Hausans oxygen measurements from the two stations. Oxygen concentrations generally improve at both assimilation and validation stations. The assimilation has a widespread effect in the South Funan Archipelago and in the southern, that's in this area here, and in the southern Little Belt, and not just locally around the assimilation stations. And this is the final conclusions of our results on the data assimilation. And with that, I would like to say thank you for your attention.